Welcome to the data visualization course using Django and a product called Bokeh. We will have some fun today. We're going to cover all of the following: what Bokeh is, what it can do. We'll take a look at some of the graphs that it can render. We'll set up a Django project from scratch, then we'll install Bokeh, and then we'll dive into plotting graphs with Bokeh. Finally, we'll end our course by using a database. We'll create a database and we'll use that data to render and plot a graph against. Let's jump in. All right, so what is Bokeh? Bokeh is an interactive visualization library. It enables us to see a visual representation of a data set and interact with it. How do we pronounce it? That's one thing that I wanted to know when I first came into contact with it. You're going to hear people pronounce it in many different ways. Technically, the way to pronounce it, and it's of Japanese origin, it's Bokeh. Bokeh. So the emphasis is on the first syllable. But I fear you'll hear it pronounced in various different ways depending upon the company you keep, so you'll know what they're talking about if they say bokeh or what have you. I also here give you the website where you can get the latest information. They have quite a lot of good documents up there. So what are the types of things that I can do with Bokeh? What are the types of visualizations that I can render? Well, the sky is pretty much the limit. Here I give you just a few pictures of some of the things that I thought were kind of neat. Everything from histograms to heat maps to bar graphs to pie charts, you name it, creating periodic tables, you can do it with Bokeh. Let your imagination lead the way. It's just a matter of getting acclimated to the software, and it's used across various different industries, as you can imagine, from the financial sector to the medical field. Wherever you would need to visualize your data, in the technology field, for instance, you can apply Bokeh to it. So hopefully we should whet your appetite through this and just scratch the surface or see the tip of the iceberg, and you can take it from there. And if you're wondering where you can get some good examples, not only does their website have plenty of good examples, I also give you a GitHub link here that you can get some more examples. But the reason why I created this course is I didn't feel that there were a ton of examples out there for using Django and Bokeh. So that's what we're going to focus on here. But if you just want to understand the bits and pieces of it, there is so much good content out there. I'm sure you'll be satisfied. And although this course really isn't about core Django concepts, we can't get around that. And I wanted to really make sure that you had a one-stop shop to be able to go soup to nuts, to set up a Django project and take it all the way through rendering data through that Django project and creating a plot in Bokeh. So we're going to start here. So this section is all about configuration. The first thing we're going to do is create a directory to house our Django project. You see here that I called mine Bokeh_project, and I'm using the IDE VS Code for this particular course. Having set up that directory, we're now going to create our virtual environment. So you see I do a pwd to make sure that I'm in that directory. Mine's called Bokeh_project, and then I issue the following command. For me, I'm on Mac. It might be a little different for you if you're not, but Python 3 -m venv, and then you call your virtual environment whatever you want. I'm calling mine virtual_env. And then once I fire off the command, if you just return to the next command line without any output, you know you did well, and you will see your directory structure change through your IDE. Again, I'm using VS Code. Under my Bokeh project right here, you see that I now have a directory structure with the parent folder being virtual_env, the name of my virtual environment. So if you have something similar, you're in good shape. Okay, so we set up our virtual environment. Now we want to activate it. So once again, we do a pwd. We confirm we're in our Bokeh_project that will hold our Django project in just a bit. Look up the syntax for Windows. It's a little bit different, but it's the same idea. Source space, then the name of your virtual environment. For me, it's virtual_env/bin/activate. And when you hit enter, you'll know that it was successful if at the beginning of your command line, you see the name of your virtual environment in parentheses. The next thing we'll do is install Django from within our virtual environment. We do that from ensuring our virtual environment is activated. And again, we know that if we see it in parentheses at the beginning of the line of our command line, and then we issue a pip install Django and let it do its thing. If you get no errors at the end of that, you're fine. And then we do the same for Bokeh, pip install Bokeh. And when Bokeh gets installed, it's going to install all these other dependencies here down at the bottom. All right, you're doing great so far. Now we actually set up our Django project itself, and that's very easy to do. Once again, from within the virtual environment, the command is Django-admin space start project space graphs, or call it whatever you want. I called it graphs. You can name yours what you like. And now we'll cd into that directory of our new project. Mine's called graphs, so I cd in there. I do a pwd to confirm that I'm at that level. And then I'm going to issue what's known as a manage.py migrate. So for me, it's Python 3 space manage.py space migrate. And this will just initially migrate data changes to our project. And the first step on this page will be us creating our super user account for our Django project. Python 3 manage.py, create users, dash, give it a username, and then you follow the instructions down to create a password. You don't have to put in an email if you don't want to. And then right after that, we'll create our application. So here, it's Python 3 manage.py start app, and then give it a name. I'm calling it Bokeh app. And you see, once we do that, we'll have yet another change to our structure. We'll see graphs, and we'll see Bokeh apps underneath graphs, and we'll see another folder graphs inside there, and we'll see our requisite SQLite database there as well. Our project folder is a sister to our virtual environment. So look at this if you get confused, but if you follow right along, you should have no problem. Now we'll update our settings.py file by adding our new application to the installed apps section. As you see it here, I have highlighted in yellow. The syntax that you'll follow is the name of your app, and in my case that's Bokeh app, then .apps for your apps.py file, and then the name of the class that corresponds to this application in your application's apps.py file. And in my case, it'll always be uppercase. In this case, it's camel case. Bokeh app config. So take a look and just double check what it is in your particular apps.py file, and you should see something that's similar to this. And now we want to update our project's urls.py file. So in your Django project, you have two urls.py files. One will be in your application, and one will be in your project. So it's the one in the project that we're interested in. So let me show you the difference. So this is the one from our application, and it may look foreign to you. We haven't gotten to that yet. And then here is the one that we're updating now from our project. You can tell the difference because it has a slash in code. So slash graphs is the one from our project, and slash Bokeh app is the one from our application. Okay, so here is the one we're interested in. Okay, and don't get confused. We have the structure on the side again. The one from the project will be in graphs. The one from the application will be in our Bokeh app. Okay, so if we close this off, you can see the one from the Bokeh app went away. That's this one, right? Close it off again. We want the outside one that's in our graphs folder, right? So I close that off, and that one goes away. Okay, now the changes that we want to make. Right here in our input section where we see from Django.urls import path, put a comma and then include, because we need this method for down here. So then in the square brackets itself in our list, we want to add this statement, this full statement that I have highlighted in yellow, path, open quotes, comma, include, and then our Bokeh apps.url. So Bokeh app.urls in quotes, outside paren, and another comma. And this will depend on what you named your app. This could be different for you, the Bokeh app. Okay, in the last section, we made our changes to the urls.py file in our project. Now we're going to make the changes to our urls.py file in the root of our application. We're going to do two things. We're going to make sure that we have all these two import statements here. From Django.urls import path, and from .import views. That imports your views.py file that's at the same directory level that this urls.py is. So it's a sister file. urls.py and views.py are sister files in this directory. That's number one. The second thing you want to do is in this urls pattern equals open square brackets, this list, you want to add this one entry right now, path, and then in parentheses, open quotes, comma, views.home, and then comma, name equals home. Home is going to be the name of the view that we're going to create for our first graph. Okay, so views.home and then comma name equals home is a naming. You're naming this path, and we can use that when we render this in the template. We're not going to do that with Bokeh in this app, but it's good practice to do. Okay, and I mentioned the views.py file. That's where our views get created, and you will ensure that you have the right import statements just like we have them here. Some of these things will come with the view when we create our Django project or Django application, and some you'll have to add on, like render to response and render, and that's render underscore to underscore response and render. We're going to be using those. And to create our first simple view, we're just going to prove out that our Django application works. You'll create exactly what I have here, a function called home, which is a view. Our view is a function. It could be a class or a function. Ours is going to be a function for this. Home request is always required for a view, a Django view as the first parameter. And then we have a simple variable first underscore graph, which equals this string or any string you want. And then we return the HTTP response, which should already be here. If it's not, make sure you add that after from Django.http import, add the HTTP response, but I'm pretty sure it should be there out of the box. And then we just pass it this variable. Just going to test out, make sure that this works. Okay. Right. And this is the last thing we're going to do with Django before we jump into building some plots and graphs. So from within your virtual environment at the command line, you will issue the Python command to start your server. So for me, it's Python 3. For you, it just might be Python, but Python 3 space manage.py run server, and you'll get a bunch of output. Within the output, you'll see the URL. It'll be 127.0.0.1 on port 8000. You can just copy that or click that. And when you run that, it should open up your browser, and it should say my first Bokeh graph will be rendered on this page. That's all we want to confirm here. Nice job. Okay, so here is where we're going to complete our Bokeh implementation. From within your virtual environment, we're going to go into Python Interactive. So for me, it's a Python 3 and then enter. For you, it might be Python enter if you're on Windows. From there, you'll get the 3 greater than arrows, and we want to do an import Bokeh. And then to determine what the version is, we'll do Bokeh dot double underscore version double underscore. For me, you see it's 110. For you, it might be something else. Once you confirm that, we want to go to this link, or you can just Google it. Either way, you want to get the Bokeh CDN, and you'll get several links. You probably don't need all 7 of these, but it's fine to get them. We'll get the CSS links, and we'll get the JavaScript links. So we'll get those, and then we'll find out what we're going to do with those on the next slide. Okay, so when you get these links, they will be only the links. They'll be only the parts in blue that start with the HTTP colon. And they will have a version of x.y.z. What we have to do is we have to take those, we have to put them in the right place, but then also we have to replace the x.y.z with your version number. That's why I ask that you get your version number. So for me, if you're like me, it's 1.1.0, and you just replace the XYZ with 1.1.0 or whatever your version is. Okay, and they are going to go what's known in Django land as a template. So we're going to build our template, and we're going to place those in the right place. The other thing you need to do is you need to put the link tags around them. You know, the link and the script tags. So 3 of them are going to be CSS files if you get all of these, and it's fine. You technically don't need the table ones, or probably even the API, but or even probably the widget right now. But you want to put the link, the full link path, just like I have it here, and then the JavaScript tags around that as well. And don't worry, as always, I always have all the code up on GitHub. The code will be here for you, so you can grab it and you don't have to recreate it, and you can use it and get to work playing with your graphs right away. So I'll have that up on GitHub for you, and the link will be below. Okay, so let's build our template. So in your Bokeh application directory, let's create a subdirectory called templates right here. Then within that directory, I want you to create a template, a file called starter.html right here. So you want to create the shell of the HTML. I know for me on VS Code, I can just do that and it creates the shell. Just do a bang, an exclamation, and then you can fill in the rest. It makes it real easy. I'm sure you know your IDE very well, so however you build that, the shell of an HTML file will be great. Then don't worry about anything else except for putting in the header, you want to put the CDN CSS files, and right before the close of the HTML tag, you want to put all the JavaScript files. And again, you'll have to add these, right? You'll have to add the first part of this link, rel style sheet type text CSS, and then the end, the quote, and the close tag, and you'll have to do the same for the script. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about these. We haven't gotten to those quite yet. But we need this. We need the starter.html here, and we need the starter.html view that we're going to get to in a minute. Okay, so within our views.py file in our application, we're going to create our second view, and this view is going to be specific to rendering a bokeh plot or a bokeh graph. So this one we'll call starter. So def starter. Request again is always the first parameter. And then we'll have plot equals figure, the figure method. That's from Bokeh, open and close quotes. And then we'll have plot.circle, which is a glyph. And we'll have two lists in there, separated by a comma. Then we'll have another comma, size equals 20, comma, color equals blue. And before I go further into the last two lines, just ensure that you have all of these import statements right here at the top. There's 3 of them that are specific to Bokeh. And you don't need the hover tool one yet, but you might as well put that in because we're going to get to that later. Make sure you have all 3 of those like that. You should already have the import render from the previous view that we created, our test view. But if you don't, add that as well. We'll need that for our view here. Okay, so we have the 3 lines. Then we have script, comma, div equals components. And then we pass that plot. And then we have our return render request, starter.html, and we have our context. Now, what is all of this? This is probably one of the most basic bokeh graphs that we can make. So let's take the component piece first. This components method returns the individual elements of an inline graph. That's what we're doing, a standalone graph for a Bokeh implementation. And when we say standalone, really that's one that is not served on a Bokeh server. So this function returns a script, in fact a JavaScript, that contains the data of our plot along with a div tag that allows this plot to be loaded into our HTML page. We're free to use these objects in our Django template. Note this though. I had plugged this in the first time I did it into a template where I had some CSS, and for some reason I had the div be white, so it didn't render anything. So make sure you don't have any CSS statements against your div right now. Okay, just let's leave that alone. These 2 elements can be inserted or templated into your HTML text, and the script, when executed, will replace the div with the actual plot. So that gets us to the plot. Plot equals figure, and then plot.circle. What are we doing here? The plot variable is an instance of the figure object. Figure enables us to create our plot. A plot is a model that allows us to add glyphs like circle. We'll get to that in a minute. Guides and annotations. The glyph is a visual shape whose attributes can be associated with data columns such as arcs or bars or wedges or lines or ovals or whatever. The circle method is a glyph method used for drawing. It's a method of the figure object. Okay, so we put all these things together. We have our figure, we have our plot that things get plotted onto. Then we have our glyphs, and there could be many of those, multiple. We're just using a circle here, and then we're going to see on the next page what this looks like. Okay, and when we restart or refresh our page, restart our Django server or refresh our page, this is what we will see, our circle graph. So let's look at this for those of us who might not be very familiar with plots and graphs. I know I don't have a huge history in this, but if you look here, let's refresh ourselves. Along the bottom, we have our x-axis. Along the side, we have our y-axis. x-axis in green, y-axis is in the purple color. Now I brought in the plot.circle. That's where the meat of this actually happens. That's where we're plotting these figures against this graph. So we have two lists. The first one represents our x coordinates and the second one represents our y coordinates. Then size equals 20. That's just going to affect the size of the blue circles themselves. They're very small by default. I made them bigger so we can see them and have some understanding here. And then I made them blue. So what happens to create the data on this graph? We're going to combine index 0, right? We're in Python now. And lists are zero base, right? We call that zero base indexing. So the very first element, the 1 right here, is at position 0 or index 0. We're going to combine that first index with the first index, the 0 index of our y coordinate list. So we have 1 plotting against 0. So that's how we get the first blue circle. Then we do the same with the remainder. The second index, which is index 1 in x, combines with the index in y, the second index in y, and we get 10, 0. We do the same with the third position, 27, 0, and 35, 0. That's how these things get plotted. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and here is the next graph that we're going to create. As you can tell, we're getting a little bit more sophisticated. We're manipulating our graph a little bit more, making it look a little better. So we're going to get into how we annotate this in different things right in the next slide. Now here we'll see the code from our view that enables us to present the graph that we just saw. So starting at the top, as usual with Django, we have our import section. In this section, we have import statements for both Django itself and for Bokeh. Here, we have these two Python lists that represent the x and y data we have plotted on our graph. In this section, we've mentioned this before, we have the Bokeh figure object, and just to refresh ourselves, figure enables us to create our plot. In this section below, 4, this is really the main reason that I wanted to create such an ugly graph, to be able to show you that this entire section is dedicated to formatting. So once we have our instance of figure, we call it plot, then we're able to add attributes to that plot. So you see here we do plot.add tools. We add a hover tool. You're able to hover. We have tooltips set to none, but of course we could change that. We have the title size changed to 20-point font. We have a plot line and everything that goes along with that. The color, is it dashed? Is it solid? That type of thing. We have background fill. We have border fill. We have margins on both sides of the plot. We have an outline line width, and we have the color for that. So there's lots of things. This is by no means exhaustive, but I wanted to give you a flavor in one section of all the different things you can do to style this or format this graph. And that's what this whole particular plot on our homepage. This was our original homepage, the little test job that we did. This is how we've changed it to render a bokeh plot on it. Now that we've had a chance to go through plotting some of these to kind of wet our whistle, I wanted to take a step back and talk about some of the plotting basics. This slide represents the basic steps to creating plots. The first thing we would do is prepare some data. Some of the options to prepare data are Python lists. We've used that. NumPy arrays or Panda series. A query against our database model. We're going to see that one in a little while. Then we tell Bokeh where we want to generate the output. Some options are in an output file, in an output notebook, for instance, Jupyter notebooks. And of course, this is not something we're doing because we're integrating with Django and we're using the components method. Then we call the figure method. This creates a plot with typical default options and easy customization of titles and tools and access labels. Then we add renderers or glyphs like line or circle for our data, specifying visual customizations or formattings like colors or legends or the width or the margin, things like that. And then you can also have Bokeh show, use the show method, or save the results. These functions save the plot to an HTML file and optionally display it in a browser. Or as we've been doing and will continue to do, we have this components method that allows us to get the script and the div tag separately and then use that in our Django view, and we'll continue to use that method. Okay, and here for the first time, we have a combo graph. We have a total of 4 data series instead of only 2. We have our X data our y0, y1, y2 data here. We have our usual figure, p equals figure, with a bunch of different options and attributes set there. And then we have a slew of renderers. And we see here that, and we're going to see this on the next slide as well, that the first one, p.line xx legend equals y equals x, is going to be the first thin blue line. We're going to go into this on the very next slide, so I won't go into all of these here, but it speaks to the complexity that one can get when they're using a bokeh graph. Of course, we have our script div equals components, we feed it p, and then we have our return render statement as we usually do. So let's flip over to the next slide and see what this is all about. Okay, and this is what gets rendered through our combo graph view. So we'll start with the preparation of the data. All of this is created from one data series, X, and you see the values there, a bunch of floats. Then we use list comprehension to get our Ys, Y0, Y1, Y2. So then we're able to take those and do whatever we want with them, render them in such a way. These are called our renderers, right? So the first thing we see is p.line, where we render X against X in terms of our X and Y data. And this is the thin blue line. This is the thin blue line that we see. Then what we do is we add circles to that. It's no longer p-line. It's not the line method. Now we're using the circle method, and we decide to fill those circles with clear or white, and we decide to make the size 8. See, so we're independent in what we get to do to each of these. Then the next one is also a line, X and Y0. So our X and our Y0 data set. And we give, of course, on all these, we have the legend, and the legend appears right here up to the right-hand side of the plot. The line there, we decide to have a width of 3. Right, so it's a thicker blue line. Then we plot another line for X against Y1 for our two different data sets. We have our legend there. We decide to make the color red, and you see that there. Then we add circles, much like we did in the other one, but this time the circle size are 6. And we fill it with red. They're now solid red circles. And finally, X against Y2 for our X and Y coordinates. And we make that orange, and we make that dashed. You have to imagine that these different data sets, of course, would represent something. So they would be 4 different things of interest to whatever the discipline is. And then we'd be able to plot them and do whatever we want to do with them. Let's look at a live example to see what the toolbar affords us next. Okay, let's take a look at the interactive part of the graph. So I'm going to take all these off. The first thing we'll do is put the pan on. So you see that allows me to do that. When I do this, nothing, right? I can zoom in 2 different ways. That way, take that off, and I can also do it through the scroll bar, which is my personal favorite. I can scroll and move, right? I can put this back to 0. I can tap these. Notice what that does. I have all my circles. Watch the circles. I can focus in on one, or I get them all back. Same with the red. Focus in just on that one. Focus in just on this one. Okay, let's take those off. I can reset. There you go. I can hover, one of my personal favorites. Shows me my index, right? That's based on our list, right? Based on our data input. So this would be index 6. Then we have our coordinates, our data, and then where they're at on the screen. And we can do the trusty old crosshairs too. We can do crosshairs with hover. So there's a lot we can do here. This is but an example of some of the things that we can get up in our toolbar. Here we'll look at an example of rendering a bar graph. We have a function called programming, and these are some made-up numbers to try to tell us which programming language is more popular. Lang is taking the place of the x-coordinate, so I have a few different programming languages in that list, and then counts are our integers against those particular strings. Then we have our figure, and we have now something new here, right? Most of these other things we've seen. We have source equals column data source. What's that? The column data source method is used here to change the color of each bar. This is my way of, when we get to the next slide, you'll see, I want each of these bars to have different colors, right? Instead of course, one way to do it is to have them all be the same. That would certainly convey a message there as well. But this is when I want each one of them to represent a distinct, in this case, programming language. So I have data equals dict, and then lang equals lang. Those will be the strings in my first list, and then counts equals counts is of course the numbers in the second one. Then color equals spectra L6. So this whole thing maps names of columns to sequences. Then we set the color through this Spectra L6 attribute, which is from the Bokeh palettes module. Spectra L6 gives a 6-element list of RGBA hex strings from the Brewer spectral color map. I have a new glyph here, which I haven't used before, called VBar. And then X equals lang. We need top. Top equals our counts. And then width 0.8. That's the width of the actual bars themselves. You'll see that. Color equals color. Legend, we're making the legend be equal to lang, to the elements in that list. And source is going to equal source. And what is source but the column data source, that method that we just talked about. So with the P legend orientation and the legend location, I did something a little bit different with the legend. You're going to see it. I put it horizontal and top in the center as opposed to off to the right, which is where I put it mostly for the whole of this presentation. And again, not to make a grid that makes a whole lot of sense, to be quite honest with you. I wanted to expose you to different things that we can do with Bokeh. So now I have a random line that kind of traces the heights, the values of these different bars. So you're going to see that. So that's where this whole next block is all about, a black line with a line width of 2. You'll see all that in a minute. We have our usual components method, and then we use our render method through Django. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, welcome to our first multicolor bar graph. So just like I promised, we have our different graphs of the 6 different programming languages. Across the bottom, across the x-axis, we have those strings, and across the right axis, we have their popularity, if you will. And then I have my legend. Like I said, for the first time, we're in the center in terms of our orientation, horizontally going across. And we have this crazy black line going across that corresponds with the heights, or the values, if you will, of the different program language popularity. So that's it. We have toolbars at the bottom. We can do all the stuff that I just showed you in the demo. Same type. We have a lasso there, which doesn't make much sense for this type of a graph. But again, just playing with this, just trying to expose you to different things here. Now, this is really why I wanted to create this presentation to begin with. I wanted to ultimately get to plotting data from a Django model into a Bokeh plot. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a model, a very simple one, 3 fields and some choices, and we'll work from there. Again, this isn't a class about learning how to use Django, so I go through this very quickly, but there are other classes that I have and other people out there that you could go to if you're at all shaky with this. So we're going to create a Django table that contains different product types and plot their totals for each of the products on a vertical bar graph. So I have a model here in my models.py inside our application called products. Name is one field. It's a character field, max of 100. I have my colors here again for the choices, max length 10, just four choices, white, blue, black, and green. And then an integer field that represents our prices. I have a string method here that will just print that out nicely, mostly for me just being able to see as I enter it in down and dirty through the admin console, and nothing more than that. So after we create this, we of course would want to run our manage py, make migrations, and migrate to propagate our changes. Okay, so we created our model. Now we have steps 2, 3, and 4 to contend with. Step 2 here is nothing more than me going into Python Interactive and just dumping the data that I created, just to be able to show you that I have products of type shoes, shirts, and belts. That's it, with various different colors and prices, all very much made up if you look at some of them. Then I create my URL pattern for the view for this. I call it products, views.products. I'm going to create a view called products, and the name also products. I create a template there, and it's the same type of template I used. All it has in it are the style sheets, the CSS, and the JavaScript from Bokeh CDN. And then I have my variable, div, and script. That's all. Now the most interesting part, I guess, we're going to create the view which will hold the logic to render our graph. So I call this view products. It ends the way, it normally would, with components taking in the plot and then returning render with our script and div variables. Okay, so at the top of the body of this function, or this view, I have shoes, belts, and shirts set to 0. So 3 integers representing our 3 product types. Then I have an empty list, counts, and I have items, which is my list that represents my 3 product types, shoes, belts, and shirts. This first step is where I create a query against my database table called products. We saw that, the model, using the values method. I use the values method to be able to get the data, the values I have stored. I do this because it's of type query set. Using values gives me a Python dictionary type object that I can now use. So here I have a for loop. I'm interested in displaying how many products I have sold against each of the 3 specific types, the shoes, the belts, and the shirts. So I iterate over my query set using an if statement to add to the 3 counters that I have set up for each of the products based on the given strings. And the strings are simple. It's either shoes, belts, or shirts. So what happens is when I find one of these 3 strings, iterating over the data in my tables, I just add to the counter the appropriate counter. So if I find shoes, I increment 1 against the shoes counter. For belts, I do the same there, and shirts, I do the same there. So now I have this counts extend method. So I use the extend method for a list where I would ultimately add the values of each of the 3 counters all at one time once my loop is done. And we've been through the figure method many times, so I won't go through that. Number 4 here, this sets the size of the graph title. So plot.title.text_font_size. I set that to 20. 5, this was very hard to find. I searched and searched and searched for this. This sets the size of the text underneath each bar graph, which was terribly small. So it's not as intuitive as you would think. It's plot.x-axis, you can do it for y-axis too, .major_label_text_font_size. I set that to 14. You'll see it in a minute. Then of course we have our plot.vbar. This is a glyph. Items equals the data for our x coordinates, tops for the y, width is the width of the vertical bars. We've seen that before. Color equals the color of the bars, and legend is the text legend in the chart itself. Okay, so let's see if this does what we think it's going to do. And yes, indeed, you might remember from a few slides ago when I showed you through Python Interactive how many of each of these products I had put into the database. The net result was I had 9 shoes, 4 shirts, and 3 belts. And yes, indeed, just like we planned it, this does its job. So there's, many more sophisticated ways to work with the model itself. But this was down and dirty for this application to use a for loop and inside that if statements based on conditions. So it works, guys. A simple example on how to extract data from your Django model and then plot it onto a graph using Bokeh. Okay, Django family, thank you for watching till the end. If this class has helped you, consider helping me to continue to bring these classes to you and others. Helping's easy. Just do the following. First, subscribe to this Yogi Coder YouTube channel. Next, like this video and leave whatever comments and or questions you'd like. Finally, share this video on any and all social media channels with your friends and colleagues. And as always, the presentation and its associated code will always be stored up on GitHub at the link in the section below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.